0 on a fateful day in June 1943, in the small town of Mahia, Texas, a pencil quivered in the hands of Unteroffizier Burkhardt as he meticulously recorded his thoughts in a hidden diary. These words, if discovered by his own officers, would have landed him in solitary confinement. 014 Burkhardt's mind was filled with doubt, as the reality he witnessed contradicted the propaganda he had been fed for years. 020 How could a nation at war on two fronts possess such abundance and prosperity? 025 Gazing out the train window, he was struck by the sight of electric lights blazing from every farmhouse, street corner, and shop window, creating an endless constellation of illumination across the Texas plains, even at the late hour of 10 p.m. 038 This was a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped Germany since the implementation of blackout regulations in 1940, even before the rural regions of Germany had long struggled with limited access to electricity, with only a fifth of farms connected to the power grid. In stark contrast, the supposedly decadent and collapsed United States showcased its industrial might, as 1,850 veterans of the Afrika Korps disembarked from a passenger train, not crammed into cattle cars or freight wagons, but comfortably accommodated in Pullman coaches with dining and sleeping facilities. The entire town of Mahia had gathered to witness this arrival, unaware that this moment would set in motion a profound psychological transformation, systematically dismantling Nazi ideology through the sheer display of American industrial capacity. The foundations of Allied victory were being laid, not on the battlefield, but in the staggering numbers and technological superiority that would soon be brought to bear. The Axis forces in North Africa faced a devastating reckoning in the spring of 1943. On May 13, General Jürgen von Arnim, who had replaced Rommel, surrendered alongside an estimated 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers in Tunisia. This marked a dramatic collapse, shattering the assumptions of these battle-hardened troops about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The numbers fluctuated as scattered units continued to lay down their arms over the following days. Among the captives was Headman Friedrich Radke, a decorated veteran of the France campaign and the North African Front, who had twice been wounded in combat. His diary would provide a first-hand account of this stunning reversal of fortune. Uncovered years later within the National Archives, the comprehensive documentation would furnish historians with the most meticulous record of the psychological toll endured by German soldiers during American captivity. The odyssey from defeat to disclosure commenced at the port of Warren, Algeria. As Radke and 30,000 fellow prisoners of war awaited transport aboard ships within makeshift encampments, the American efficiency was already beginning to shatter their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of captives daily with an organizational acumen that surpassed even the pinnacle of Wehrmacht capabilities. Identities were photographed and filed, medical examinations conducted, inoculations administered, and Geneva Convention rights elucidated in fluent German by American officers specially trained for this purpose. The captives were stunned by the unexpected quality of their rations upon capture. Oberreiter Hans Mueller, a soldier from the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later, recounting his experience. While awaiting transport in the Ororan enclosure, the Americans provided them with fare far superior to what they had subsisted on during 6 months of desert combat: white bread, real coffee, and meat twice daily. The prisoners initially suspected this was mere propaganda, an attempt to impress them, unaware that this was the standard military sustenance. The Liberty ships that would ferry them across the Atlantic were themselves testaments to American industrial prowess, with the SS Robert E. Peary constructed in a mere 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. The Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, achieved an astounding feat that would have seemed like mere propaganda to the Germans. At the height of production, these facilities churned out vessels at a remarkable pace of 3 per day. Rather than returning empty, these ships carried a significant human cargo, transporting up to 30,000 prisoners of war, PSWs, per month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 marked the second phase of a psychological demolition. Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division meticulously documented his experience in letters to his family after repatriation, noting the sheer volume of food waste disposed of by the ship's crew each day. The American sailors displayed a staggering abundance, casually discarding half-eaten steaks, full loaves of bread, and gallons of spoiled milk, Zimmermann observed. This wanton waste, not intended to mock the visitors, simply reflected the limitless supply at their disposal. The very ships transporting the sailors became mobile showcases of American industrial might, as the passengers learned that their vessel was one of 2,710 Liberty ships constructed during the war, each requiring 250,000 parts sourced from 32 states. Even the engines the guards proudly shared were manufactured in 3 separate facilities. The Prussian aristocrat, Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, whose family had served in every German conflict since the reign of Frederick the Great, later reflected in his memoirs on the approach to the American coast. As their vessel neared the shoreline, he observed the rotating radar antenna atop the bridge, a technology that the Germans had believed was limited to their own forces and perhaps the British. This realization marked the moment when Stobern first suspected Germany's defeat. On August 2, 1943, at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia, the initial glimpse of the United States shattered the last vestiges of that belief. Across the country, separate factories were churning out 900 horsepower 554 engines, which were then assembled at ports that had scarcely existed 2 years prior. This industrial might foreshadowed the overwhelming force that would soon confront the German military. The Norfolk naval installation spanned an expansive 4,300-acre expanse, its docks stretching for miles and its cranes efficiently loading and unloading numerous vessels concurrently. In a single day, this solitary port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in an entire week. Gerrit Johann Weber, a factory worker conscripted into service, observed 47 cargo ships in various states of loading and unloading. Each crane, he noted in his private journal, effortlessly lifted loads that would have necessitated the labor of a dozen men and horses back in Germany. Powered by electricity, they operated smoothly and continuously, without the coal smoke that plagued industrial centers. The troops were organized into columns as they made their way to the waiting trains. Along the journey, they passed parking lots brimming with civilian vehicles, many belonging to dock workers. In Germany, private car ownership remained a luxury reserved for the affluent and the party elite. The much-touted Volkswagen, promised to the German public since 1934, had materialized as little more than a propaganda dream, with fewer than 1,000 units ever delivered to ordinary citizens. Here, however, regular laborers commuted to their jobs in their own automobiles. Yet, nothing could have prepared them for the sight of the trains themselves. These were not the cramped boxcars or the 40 and 8 inches wagons, designed to transport 40 men or 8 horses that had carried German troops across Europe, but rather full-fledged passenger coaches. Plush Pullman cars with cushioned seats awaited them. The passengers boarded the train cars, which had been converted into sleeping quarters. Elegant dining cars with crisp white linens and gleaming silverware awaited them. Observation cars featured expansive panoramic windows, allowing for breathtaking vistas. As Hetman Radke noted, "We embarked as tourists, not as captives." The American guards seemed almost sheepish about the level of comfort provided. One sergeant even apologized that the air conditioning was not functioning properly in their carriage. Air conditioning, a luxury the prisoners had believed existed only on Hitler's personal train, until this August journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma. This 3-day train ride would ultimately prove more damaging to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains traversed through Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, witnessing an America that contradicted everything they had been led to believe. The small towns they traversed that night were ablaze with electric light, a sight that would have been unimaginable in their German homeland. Martinsville, Danville, and Greensboro, communities that in Germany would have been fortunate to possess a single illuminated street lamp, now displayed radiant shop windows, electric signage, and homes with multiple rooms aglow. Even the trains they rode passed by factories operating night shifts, their windows shining, and parking lots teeming with activity well past midnight. Oberg-Reiter Murr, whose father had been a Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, later recounted in a letter discovered in 1987 their astonishment at the ubiquitous electricity that seemed to power every American town they encountered that first night, far exceeding even the resources of their own city. The guards had assured them that this level of electrification had been the norm across the United States since the 1920s, a claim the writer had initially dismissed as a falsehood. He simply shrugged and remarked that the outcome remained to be seen. At the Roanoke station in Virginia, the train halted to replenish its water and coal supplies. The captives observed as American railway personnel accomplished in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, and mechanized lubrication systems, every aspect of the operation showcased technological superiority. Even more unsettling was the casual affluence of the workers themselves. They donned leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' earnings. They sipped Coca-Cola from glass bottles, carelessly discarding the empties. Smoking cigarettes incessantly, they casually extinguished them while still partially lit. The disheartened Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer from Siemens, could only watch in dismay. Before the war, the officer calculated that the single railway yard they stopped in used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day. He described the waste as magnificent, with lights burning in empty buildings and electric fans running in vacant rooms, a careless disregard for resources. As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners encountered the sheer scale of American industrial power. Through the windows, they observed endless factories, each one larger than anything they had seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the bustling city of Munich bore witness to a remarkable transformation. Near Louisville, the trains cautiously navigated the Rubbertown complex, where synthetic rubber plants had sprung from vacant land in a mere 18 months. 4 colossal facilities, each employing thousands of workers, produced an astounding 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. In contrast, Germany, the very birthplace of the process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its most successful year. Chemist Erich Hoffmann, hailing from IG Farben, recognized the significance of this feat during a post-war interview. "I knew those plants," he recounted. "I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them, all in this one location." The vast expanse of the Willow Run facility, situated just outside Detroit, was a sight to behold. This colossal factory, constructed in a mere 9 months, churned out a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at the height of its production. Manned by a staggering 42,000 workers, the plant utilized an intricate network of 1,500 subcontractors to assemble the bombers from a staggering 1,550,000 individual parts. Spanning an immense 2.5 million square feet, the facility's electricity consumption exceeded that of the entire German city of Cologne. As the train passed, Luftwaffe pilot Hutman Verley, shot down over Tunisia, peered out the window, counting no fewer than 17 B-24s in various stages of completion. The sheer scale and efficiency of this American industrial might have been a revelation to those who had been told of the country's limited production capabilities. The inferior, hastily assembled aircraft were expected to disintegrate in battle, but the precision of the production lines and the quality of the construction were evident. These were not substandard planes. They were simply manufactured at a pace that defied imagination. As the trains penetrated deeper into America, the destruction of Nazi mythology became more complete. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River on the Eads Bridge, while barges carrying more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942 floated below. The prisoners could see grain elevators lining both banks, each one holding enough wheat to sustain a German city for months. Unreicher Karl Schmidt, a Bavarian farmer's son, recorded his observations in his writings. The American logistical prowess was a sight to behold for the German prisoners of war. As they transported ammunition in staggering quantities, the captives marveled at the sheer abundance of food being loaded onto a single barge, enough to sustain an entire village for half a decade. The crane operator, oblivious to their plight, casually indulged in a hearty sandwich, the meat portion thicker than the weekly ration the Germans had endured in Africa. Arriving in Kansas City, the train rumbled through a colossal stockyard, where tens of thousands of cattle awaited their fate. The air was thick with the pungent aroma of the meatpacking plants, a stark contrast to the meager 200 grams of meat the German soldiers had been allotted, if they were fortunate. Watching the American workers devour beef sandwiches during their lunch break, the prisoners were struck by the sheer abundance, as the Germans had once viewed bread as a luxury. Paul Fischer's account reveals a stark contrast between the prisoners' meager rations and the guards' abundant access to meat, cheese, and vegetables on white bread. The guard nonchalantly purchased 20 such hearty meals with a single dollar bill, highlighting the normality of this fare for the captors. The arrival at Camp Hearn, Texas, further exemplified the stark divide, as the hastily constructed facility housed 3,000 to 4,800 prisoners in conditions exceeding their civilian experiences. These wooden barracks boasted electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat, luxuries that surpassed the construction of entire homes. The rural German settlements were well provisioned. The medical staff among the detainees marveled at the camp hospital's facilities. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a center better equipped than most German civilian healthcare institutions. X-ray machines, surgical tools, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been scarce in Germany since 1941 were all standard issue for the enemy prisoners. As Dr. Bauer would later testify, they had penicillin, the miraculous drug they had only heard whispers about. They used it liberally, even on inmates with minor infections. German soldiers were perishing for lack of basic sulfa drugs, while the Americans freely provided their most cutting-edge medicines. The camp kitchen. The prison kitchens had transformed into showcases of American affluence. Inmates tasked with food preparation stumbled upon walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of feeding 5,000 people. The daily menu boasted fresh dairy, eggs, meat, produce, and white bread, luxuries German civilians had not enjoyed since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former Munich hotel chef, lamented, "We discarded more food today than my family has seen in 3 years." Not spoiled, but excess. American regulations mandate a 10% surplus to guarantee full rations for every prisoner. I wept as I tossed perfectly good bread into the garbage. By September 1943, the prison kitchens had become showcases of American prosperity. The scarcity of agricultural labor in America during the period prompted the utilization of prisoner of war (POW) personnel in fields and factories nationwide. This pragmatic measure, compelled by exigency, ultimately proved more detrimental to Nazi ideology than any propaganda campaign could have achieved. Daily, groups of captives were transported to work sites, traversing the American heartland without blindfolds or restricted routes, granting them unfettered observation. They witnessed the expansive cornfields and wheat farms, the factories operating around the clock, the well-stocked shops, the car-filled parking lots, and the homes equipped with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin near Houston, Unratzia Herbert Lang marveled as a single machine processed more cotton in an hour than his entire village could manage. The Colorado River Authority's Rural Electrification Initiative had energized a staggering 90% of Texas farms by 1943. This power source fueled a cotton gin, allowing the owner, a regular farmer rather than an aristocrat or party member, to process 18 bales in a month, a feat unimaginable using traditional methods. His workers, including African Americans, enjoyed lunches richer than the weekly rations of German laborers. This level of agricultural mechanization and worker welfare was the norm, as evidenced by the well-equipped farms they passed in Nebraska, where even prisoners toiled in the sugarcane fields, marveling at the technological advancements. The vast American farmlands amazed the visitors, who marveled at the efficiency of a single combine harvester, capable of accomplishing the work of 100 laborers. The expansive fields, each surpassing the size of entire German counties, yielded bountiful harvests that seemed almost fantastical compared to their homeland's modest yields. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, stationed on a farm near Scottsluff, observed with awe the 16-year-old son of a farmer operating a tractor worth more than his father's lifetime earnings, a machine the boy dismissed as unremarkable, eagerly anticipating a newer John Deere model. The most astonishing insights were experienced by those German prisoners of war who toiled in or near American industrial facilities. While the Geneva Convention barred direct wartime production, a legal technicality permitted PSWs to labor in sectors that liberated American workers for military manufacturing. This allowance enabled thousands of German captives to witness the remarkable capacity of American industry firsthand. At a Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey, prisoners observed production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories could handle in an entire month. The facility operated with a skeleton crew of women and elderly men, as the majority of young workers had been conscripted, yet its output surpassed peacetime levels. Stabsfeld Webel Ernst Wagner, who had been employed in such a setting, recounted his profound impressions. A German food processing facility from the pre-war era captured the experience in detail. Automation was the norm, with electric conveyor belts, automated filling equipment, and steam cookers capable of simultaneously processing hundreds of cans. A lone elderly woman oversaw the controls, managing a task that would have required 50 workers in Germany, all while listening to the radio and sipping coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant caught glimpses of the automotive industry's wartime transformation. The River Rouge complex, visible across the water, employed a staggering 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. This facility consumed a remarkable 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, surpassing the entire city of Hamburg. The expansive parking lots were a testament to the scale of this industrial operation. The post-war accounts of French historian Kellner vividly described the stark contrast in automobile ownership between German workers and their American captors. Whereas the typical German factory laborer could afford not just one, but often two personal vehicles, one for commuting and another for family use, the American officers overseeing the prison camps found this level of private transportation almost unimaginable. As one guard remarked, the sheer prevalence of car ownership among the ostensibly working-class inmates had left the American supervisors thoroughly bewildered. By the winter of 1943, this and other observations had contributed to a phenomenon the U.S. intelligence community termed ideological collapse syndrome, a growing disillusionment among prisoners with the Nazi regime, as evidenced by surging demands to access American media and educational materials. Major Paul Noland, part of the monitoring team, documented this troubling trend in his December 1943 report. The detainees no longer dispute when presented with production data. They have witnessed too much to continue their fervent protests. The most ardent Nazi supporters have grown silent, still professing loyalty to Germany but refraining from boasts of impending victory. Many now openly question the claims they were fed about America. The camp newspapers produced by the prisoners themselves began reflecting this transformation. Dear Ruth, the publication circulated at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, gradually shifted from defiant nationalism to discussions of democracy, economic systems, and post-war reconstruction. The editors, carefully selected anti-Nazi prisoners, found their audience increasingly receptive to these evolving perspectives. Corporal Hermann Gutz, captured alongside the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter that passed through American censors, "We were told America was a." The Italian nation, once perceived as feeble and disunited, has proven to be a formidable force, contrary to the propaganda disseminated by malicious individuals. This land, which was once deemed incapable of military prowess, has emerged as one of the most organized, unified, and powerful nations on the global stage. The treatment of Italian prisoners following Italy's surrender in September 1943 dealt a devastating blow to the Nazi ideology. Italian prisoners of war who agreed to collaborate were formed into Italian service units, granted improved living conditions, increased pay, and greater freedom. German prisoners, who had once considered the Italians as allies, witnessed their former comrades working alongside American forces, dining in American establishments, and even engaging in romantic relationships with American women. As Headman Friedrich Schultz observed, the Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated. The American approach towards their German captives during the war was surprisingly compassionate. These former foes were granted the freedom to work, earn wages, and send remittances back home, a stark contrast to the treatment they had endured. As one prisoner observed, "This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system." The Christmas of 1943 marked a profound psychological shift, as American organizations, churches, and civic groups distributed over 500,000 holiday packages to the German prisoners of war. Each care package contained essentials like cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities even invited the prisoners to join them for Christmas dinners, though most were unable to do so due to regulations. At Camp Hearn in Texas, the Methodist Church Choir performed German carols for the detainees, while women from the town sent in homemade cookies. The festive season brought unexpected acts of compassion. Handcrafted Christmas cards were delivered by the Boy Scouts, shattering the last vestiges of Nazi racial ideology. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had perished in the Hamburg bombing, expressed his astonishment. "They know we are their enemies, with many having sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness." What kind of people treat their foes in this manner? Only those utterly confident of victory and secure in their power. The Christmas feast itself was a revelation, with an abundance of turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, and ice cream, quantities of food unseen in Germany since before the First World War. The prisoners indulged until they were. Captive Germans marveled at the lavish provisions bestowed upon them, with one remarking that the sumptuous Christmas feast surpassed even the dining experiences of high-ranking officers and party officials. The guards attested that this was a typical American family's holiday meal, prompting the prisoners to ponder the quality of sustenance afforded to their own troops. By early 1944, over 40,000 German detainees had enrolled in educational programs, immersing themselves in English, American history, mathematics, and the sciences. Prestigious institutions like the University of Chicago and Stanford University facilitated these endeavors, satisfying the prisoners' insatiable thirst for knowledge and exposure to democratic principles and economics. The American landscape proved to be a revelation for those who had been led to believe that the nation was a land of uncultured savages. Visitors encountered vast libraries housing millions of volumes, universities open to all social strata, and scientific research at the forefront of global progress. They perused American newspapers, freely consuming a diversity of viewpoints, a luxury denied under Nazi rule. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby, where he was struck by the inclusive, universal approach to science espoused by American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany. These scholars, he later wrote, spoke of science as a shared human endeavor, unbound by ideology, and generously imparted knowledge even to their former adversaries, a concept utterly foreign to minds shaped by Nazi doctrine. The camp theaters, meanwhile, offered a window into the cultural richness of American society. American films, not propaganda, but standard Hollywood productions, were viewed by the prisoners. They watched Gone with the Wind, which depicted American defeat and recovery, resonating with their own situation. Amazed that Americans would showcase such self-criticism to their enemies, the prisoners noted that, "They hide nothing," as Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote. "They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker." In contrast, such criticism would mean death in Germany, but here it was considered patriotic. The spring of 1944 saw an expansion of prisoner labor programs as American production reached its peak. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and fabrication plants, witnessing the full extent of American industrial capacity. The numbers told the story. The Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans was a remarkable site of wartime production. Prisoners unloaded the steel that would be transformed into the landing craft essential for the D-Day invasion. Witnessing the assembly of 700 boats per month, each requiring 20,000 individual parts, was a testament to the factory's remarkable efficiency. With a workforce of 20,000, including thousands of women operating cranes, welding hulls, and managing production lines, the facility defied conventional wisdom. As Stabsfeld-Weibel Kurt Zimmermann observed, women doing men's work, Negroes operating complex machinery, teenagers running drilling equipment. Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy. Yet the production never faltered, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in 3 continuous shifts. The Higgins Boat Factory outproduced the entire U.S. Navy in a single month, a staggering achievement that no propaganda could diminish. Republic Steel's Ohio facility astonished onlookers with its remarkable steel output, churning out an astounding 10,000 tons daily. The blast furnaces operated relentlessly, fueled by a constant supply of iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. This scale of production dwarfed even the peak capabilities of Germany's industrial might. As former worker Paul Hartmann recounted, "I thought I understood industrial production, but this was beyond imagination. They wasted more steel in spillage than we could produce. The workers, despite their complaints about overtime, managed to outproduce what the Nazis could achieve even with forced labor and around-the-clock shifts." The summer of 1944 marked the final blow to Nazi propaganda, as this American industrial prowess shattered any illusions of German superiority. The German captives stationed across the American heartland were astonished by the sheer scale and efficiency of agricultural production in the Midwest. In the wheat fields of Kansas, they observed single farms yielding more grain than entire German provinces. Massive combine harvesters, akin to ships traversing a golden ocean, could reap 100 acres per day. The colossal grain elevators that stored this bounty could hold more wheat than Germany imported annually. As one Prussian farmer remarked, a single American farmer with such advanced machinery could accomplish the work of 100 of his German counterparts. Aerial photographs revealed endless expanses of golden grain, so abundant that even substantial losses would still leave a surplus. In the vast expanse of California's Central Valley, a staggering sight unfolded. 35,000 prisoners toiled in the sprawling orchards, harvesting a bounty that dwarfed the entirety of Europe. Yet, they witnessed a peculiar phenomenon: perfectly edible fruit, blemished only slightly, was discarded without hesitation. This concept, so foreign to the hunger-ravaged prisoners from Germany, caused profound psychological distress. Entire crops were sometimes plowed under, a strategic move to maintain price stability, as Gerrit Otto Schultz observed. Mountains of oranges were bulldozed into pits, simply because there were too many, he wrote. The prisoners, desperate to send this surplus to their starving families back home, pleaded with the sympathetic guards, only to be met with the harsh reality that it was impossible. This wanton waste, the guards explained, was a calculated display of the nation's boundless resources. In the face of such abundance, the prisoners' anguish over the destruction of nourishment they had once desperately craved only underscored the stark contrast between their past and present circumstances. On the 6th of June, 1944, the momentous news of the Normandy invasion reached the German prisoner camps, shattering the last vestiges of their ideological convictions. The sheer scale of the operation, with 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men in the first wave, demonstrated the American organizational prowess that far exceeded the wildest expectations of Nazi Germany. Prisoners at Camp Shelby were able to witness newsreel footage of the invasion within days, observing the endless procession of ships, the construction of artificial harbors, and the supply system that delivered 15,000 tons of material daily across the open beaches. Confronted with the sight of their homeland being crushed by the very nation they had been told was too weak to fight, prisoners like Friedrich von Tauben came to the realization that all was lost, not just the war, but the entire ideological foundation upon which their beliefs had been built. The Nazi regime had dared to challenge the industrial might of the world, armed with little more than fantastical narratives and racial ideologies. Their soldiers, equipped with rifles and courage, had confronted the enemy's trucks and automatic weapons. Yet, during their captivity, the German prisoners encountered something that challenged the Nazi doctrine more profoundly than any material wealth: the humanity of the Americans. Despite the propaganda portraying them as weak and sentimental, the prisoners discovered a people secure in their strength, and willing to show compassion. When Gerrit Hans Miller's son perished in the Hamburg bombing, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message and offered his condolences. Similarly, when Lieutenant Paul Fischer's wife wrote of her struggle to feed their children, American church groups responded by sending food. The American forces demonstrated a nuanced approach during the conflict, distinguishing the German populace from the Nazi regime. As Hetman Otto noted, they conveyed that their fight was against Hitler, not the German people. This distinction, which could have been perceived as mere propaganda, proved genuine. The Allies prepared the groundwork for Germany's post-war reconstruction, rather than seeking its total destruction. The medical care provided to prisoners was particularly impactful. German doctors collaborated with their American counterparts, acquiring new skills and utilizing advanced equipment. Prisoners received surgical interventions that would have been accessible only to the privileged classes in Germany. Furthermore, the Wehrmacht's limited mental health services were expanded, with traumatized soldiers receiving counseling for attempted suicides, as Dr. Friedrich Bauer observed. The American forces demonstrated a measured and compassionate approach, seeking to separate the German people from the Nazi regime and laying the foundation for Germany's eventual rehabilitation. The secret re-education program, initiated in March 1945, had yielded remarkable outcomes. Over 25,000 prisoners had voluntarily enrolled in democracy courses, where they explored topics like constitutional governance, free markets, and civil liberties. The camp newspapers featured articles on these subjects, and discussion groups debated Germany's post-war future. The program's success surpassed all anticipations, as prisoners who had arrived as ardent Nazis were now composing essays about democratic reconstruction. Officers who had sworn allegiance to Hitler were devising plans to implement American agricultural techniques in the aftermath of the war. "We became missionaries for democracy," acknowledged Oust Hermann Göring. Prisoners experiencing mental breakdowns received therapy, not physical punishment, revealing a strength in the camp's humane approach toward its adversaries, a confidence stemming from true power. The Reich Marshal's 1975 interview provided a unique perspective, not through coercion or propaganda, but through first-hand observation. The American authorities were surprised to witness ordinary prisoners living better than the German aristocracy, leading them to desire a similar transformation for their own country. The extent of this change was so profound that the authorities grew concerned about the prisoners' enthusiasm for American ways, with some requesting to remain in the United States after the war and others marrying American women they had met through correspondence programs. Thousands would eventually immigrate to America in the 1950s. The final revelation came in April 1945, as American forces liberated the concentration camps in Germany, and the footage was shown to German prisoners. Initially, many refused to believe it, dismissing it as propaganda. The testimonies from American troops, photographic evidence, newsreels, and eventually letters from Germany itself all pointed to an undeniable truth. 37.05 The psychological toll was immense, as soldiers who had clung to a sense of German honor despite military defeat now confronted the utter moral collapse of their nation. 37-14 Everything they had fought for was not merely vanquished, but revealed as inherently evil. 37-20 In the words of Hetman Walter Schmidt, "We thought we were warriors for a great cause, only to discover we were tools of criminals." 37-28 We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples, but found that we were the true barbarians. 37-35 The Americans we had dismissed as weak and decadent showed us the true meaning of civilization. 37-42 As the war The Second World War's conclusion in May 1945 brought about a complex emotional landscape for 36,959 German prisoners of war facing repatriation. Their captivity had exposed them to an American reality vastly different from the preconceptions they had held. Paradoxically, these former soldiers had often fared better in terms of sustenance and dignity as prisoners than they had as members of the German military. The final months of internment were devoted to preparing them for their return to a devastated homeland. American authorities provided vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction to these individuals. Prisoners gained insight into the impending Marshall Plan, understanding that the United States sought to rebuild rather than punish Germany. "They prepared us to rebuild our country," wrote Ost Friedrich von Tauben. "They gave us skills, knowledge, hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future." The aftermath of the war left Germany in a state of disarray, with the country divided, decimated, and impoverished. Yet, amidst this bleak landscape, a glimmer of hope emerged. Between 1945 and 1946, over 371,000 German prisoners of war were repatriated from American camps, bringing with them an invaluable asset: knowledge of how a thriving democratic industrial society functioned. These former prisoners had witnessed firsthand the efficiency, productivity, and prosperity of American society. They had seen the possibility of reconstruction, and many went on to play pivotal roles in West Germany's remarkable recovery. Hans Kroll, a prisoner at Camp Shelby, later became the West German ambassador, exemplifying the transformative impact of these unwitting agents of change. The generosity of the victors, a stark contrast to the vindictiveness of the Nazi regime, was initially incomprehensible to the German psyche. Yet, this exposure to a functioning democratic system would prove to be a catalyst for the country's rebirth, as the returning prisoners shared their experiences and insights, guiding the way towards a brighter future. The United States played a pivotal role in shaping the futures of several prominent figures. Walter Hallstein, an instructor at Camp Co., went on to become the esteemed president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Marr, a detainee at Camp Herne, later served as Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Edward Ackermann, a prisoner at Fort Robinson, emerged as a driving force behind German agricultural reform. These individuals brought American methods, efficiency, and democratic ideals to transform German industry, agriculture, and politics. The remarkable economic resurgence of the 1950s was, in part, built upon the knowledge and insights gained within the American prison camp system. As Hans Kroll eloquently expressed in his memoirs, "We learned that prosperity stemmed from freedom, not conquest." They witnessed firsthand how democracy fostered wealth, diversity strengthened the nation, and treating workers well boosted productivity. The German prisoners' experiences as captives in the United States profoundly shaped the new Germany that emerged. Historians have hailed the German POW program in America as one of the most effective re-education initiatives ever undertaken. Without resorting to coercion or traditional propaganda, the sheer industrial might and democratic values of the United States transformed hardened Nazis into future champions of democracy. The program's success stemmed from its reliance on first-hand observation rather than rhetoric. Prisoners witnessed American society operating at peak efficiency while treating its adversaries with respect. They marveled at an industrial capacity that made German production appear primitive. The prisoners' exposure to a standard of living that exposed Nazi promises as mere fantasies cemented the program's impact. As Dr. Arnold Kramer, the preeminent historian of German POWs in America, concluded, "America won the propaganda war not through words, but through deeds." The National Socialist regime's downfall was not achieved through crafty propaganda, but rather through the sheer tangibility of everyday comforts. Each hearty meal, every electric light, and every functioning lavatory served as a powerful rebuke to the Nazi ideology. The prisoners of war were ultimately won over by the prosperity they experienced. The statistics bear this out. Of the 371,683 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% attempted to escape, with a total of only 2,222 such attempts recorded. Post-war surveys revealed that 95% of the prisoners rated their treatment as good or excellent. Most strikingly, thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades after the conflict's conclusion. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, over 500 surviving German POWs returned to the United States, many accompanied by their families, eager to revisit the places where their transformation had taken place. Former Oberreiter Hans Vea, who had been detained at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later returned to become a physician in Georgetown, Maine, addressed the gathering. He recounted that life in the camps was a significant improvement for many who had grown up in Germany's cold water flats. They discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, they discovered dignity. Ex-Stabsfeld-Weibel Kurt Meir, who had worked on farms in Iowa, added that the farmers treated them not as foes, but as young men far from home. The farmers shared their meals, their expertise, and even their dwellings, a remarkable display of humanity from people whose sons were engaged in combat against them. This experience profoundly altered our perspectives. At the 1985 reunion gathering, former OBIS member Herman Gutz, then 78 years old, delivered the keynote address that encapsulated the essence of this transformation. We had arrived in America as adversaries, as Nazis, as believers in a falsehood. Yet, we departed as friends, as Democrats, as individuals who had witnessed the truth. America demonstrated to us that strength emanates not from conquest, but from productivity, not from animosity, but from diversity, and not from tyranny, but from liberty. We observed the arsenal of democracy operating at full capacity. We witnessed farmers who nourished the world, workers who constructed the instruments of triumph, and citizens who extended dignity even to their foes. We learned that the true power of America lay not in its military might, but in its boundless capacity for innovation and its unwavering self-assurance. Returning to Germany, our mission was to construct a society that could create rather than destroy, one that could thrive through peaceful means rather than war. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built upon lessons learned within American internment camps. We who had come as conquerors departed as students. To America, from your former enemies, now your friends. Thank you for showing us the path. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, as Americans and Germans, once adversaries, now stood united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed unimaginable when those initial trains rolled into Texas. The German prisoner of war experience in America during the war years was a remarkable undertaking, as evidenced by the staggering statistics that capture both its scale and success. Across the nation, a vast network of over 500 camps was established, spanning 45 states, with the exception of Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. These facilities ranged in capacity, accommodating anywhere from 250 to 12,000 prisoners each, and were constructed with remarkable efficiency, with the average camp completed in just 90 days. The prisoner population reached a peak of 371,683 German POWs, part of a total Axis POW population of 425,871, in May 1945. The influx of new arrivals was equally impressive, with an average of 20,000 per month in 1943, rising to 30,000 after D-Day and reaching a staggering 60,000 in the final months of the war. The contribution of these prisoners to the American war effort was substantial, as they were put to work in a variety of labor-intensive tasks, leveraging their skills and manpower to support the nation's industrial and agricultural needs during a time of great demand. During the 1940s, the U.S. prison system mobilized an impressive labor force to address critical shortages. Prisoners contributed an astounding 45 million man-days of agricultural work, processed 100 million board feet of lumber, and generated $230 million in labor value, all while earning a meager 80-cent daily wage. Remarkably, despite over 371,000 prisoners, there were only 2,222 escape attempts, a mere 0.6% success rate, with no permanent escapes and most recaptured within 24 hours. The program also prioritized education, with over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in courses, 135 camp newspapers published, and 30,000 taking English classes, alongside 15,000 in vocational training and 8,000 in university correspondence courses. Notably, around 5,000 former prisoners immigrated to the U.S. after the war, and over 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families for an average of 31 years. The former German prisoners who ventured back as tourists or business partners found themselves profoundly impacted by their experiences. A staggering 95% of them rated the treatment they received as good or excellent, while 74% believed their captivity had positively transformed their worldview. Remarkably, 61% expressed a newfound interest in learning about democracy, and less than 10% maintained strong Nazi beliefs by 1945. These German prisoners didn't merely witness history, they were fundamentally changed by it. Their captivity became an education, their defeat an enlightenment, and their imprisonment a liberation from the ideological shackles of Nazism. In the end, America's greatest triumph was not on the battlefield, but in the prison camps, where the overwhelming evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not: the complete transformation of enemy minds. The former German prisoners had. The German prisoners of war who arrived on American soil were convinced of their nation's superiority and the weakness of the United States. However, by the time they departed, they had witnessed the undeniable truth. The industrial prowess of America was not merely overwhelming, but utterly incomprehensible to minds shaped by scarcity and tyranny. The very trains that had transported them into captivity in 1943 had carried the warriors of the Third Reich. Yet, the ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried the architects of democracy. They had glimpsed the future, and it was a resounding success. Their experiences stand as a testament to a profound reality. The most formidable weapon in America's arsenal was not military might, but the sheer, overwhelming evidence of a free society's capacity to create abundance. The German prisoners of war who were held captive in American facilities during the conflict found themselves at the heart of a profound transformation. Their experiences would ultimately lay the groundwork for Europe's post-war resurgence, effectively dismantling the Nazi vision. These former adversaries returned home not as vanquished foes, but as eyewitnesses to the remarkable achievements of free societies. The economic renaissance that revitalized West Germany in the 1950s was built upon the foundations established within those American internment camps, where enemy soldiers learned that prosperity stemmed not from conquest, but from liberty, not from racial supremacy, but from human dignity, and not from totalitarian control, but from democratic collaboration. The German POWs had arrived in America anticipating a weak, fragmented nation on the brink of collapse. Instead, they encountered an industrial powerhouse. The German prisoners of war who arrived in Mahia, Texas, were confronted with a reality that shattered their preconceptions. They had come as captives, but departed as observers of America's unparalleled industrial might and compassionate spirit. The awe they felt towards the nation's prosperity sowed the seeds for the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of their homeland. Their experiences would forever alter the trajectory of their lives and those of their descendants, who would grow up in a Germany allied with the United States. A partnership forged from the transformative encounter that took place when the Afrika Korps veterans disembarked and discovered the flaws in their beliefs. The story of these German POWs in America is ultimately a testament to the power of perspective-shifting encounters. The narrative depicts a tale of redemption through enlightenment. It demonstrates that the grandest triumphs are often secured not through decimation, but through demonstration, not through propaganda, but through progress, not through animosity, but through humanity. The German soldiers who witnessed the industrial prowess of America became unwitting emissaries of democracy, carrying back to their homeland the seeds of transformation that would blossom into one of the most successful reconstructions in history. Their journey from Nazi combatants to democratic citizens stands as one of the most remarkable metamorphoses of modern times. This was accomplished not through coercion, but through the overwhelming evidence of what free people could accomplish through collective effort. In the end, this was America's secret weapon. The United States possessed an unparalleled 50-27 manufacturing prowess, churning out more tanks and aircraft than any other country in history. Yet, its true strength lay not merely in raw production, but in the 50-34 transformative power of its example. The German prisoners of war were awestruck by America's industrial supremacy, but this was eclipsed by the 50-41 profound impact it had on them. This shift in perspective laid the groundwork for a more harmonious global order.